Howdy, my name is Frankie Jackson, pronouns they, them. I'm the coordinator of the LGBTQ+ Pride Center in the office of the Dean of Student Life at Texas A&M University. I'd like to welcome everyone, wherever you may be, to Pride Live and wish everyone a happy Pride Month. I'm joined this evening by Denise Christofi and Jasmine Jones from the Offices of Health Promotion, Michelle Robichek from Counseling and Psychological Services, and Jennifer Lux from Sexual Assault Resource Center, also known as SARC. The goal of this discussion is to understand interpersonal violence prevention, trends during the COVID-19 pandemic, and available resources. You can submit questions over Facebook Live or message the center directly. I'd now like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why they wanted to speak today.
Well, I'll start. My name is Denise Christofi. I'm the coordinator for interpersonal violence prevention in health promotion at Texas A&M University.
My name is Jasmine Jones, and my pronouns are she and hers, and I am an interpersonal violence prevention specialist in the Office of Health Promotion at Texas A&M University.
My name is Michelle Robichek, and I'm a licensed professional counselor with Counseling and Psychological Services at Texas A&M University. I'm currently housed in the vet school.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer. I am the Education and Outreach Specialist at the Sexual Assault Resource Center. We are a nonprofit in town.
Thank you all. So I think we're going to get started today with some definitions and understanding the topic a little bit better. Denise, if you'd like to share sort of the things that you've prepared, that would be great.
Sure. So I want to start with kind of laying a foundation for our discussion tonight, because this is all about what is interpersonal violence, right? And how does it intersect with the pandemic and then other identity as well. So intersectionality is really important to this conversation. So a basic understanding of what interpersonal violence is really important. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share a slide that we use pretty readily in our educational presentations to help with this discussion a little bit. So I want to start with a definition of what interpersonal violence is, and this is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is an intentional use of physical force or power. So that could happen through a threat or an action against a person or a community that results in some degree of injury, right? So injury all the way up until death. So that's the basic definition of what interpersonal violence is. It's really important for folks to understand that this can happen during the life course. I know particularly for students at colleges and universities, we tend to associate interpersonal violence specifically with Title IX, sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic and dating violence, and stalking. And those are all types of interpersonal violence, but these can be experienced from childhood all the way up until older age. So things like child abuse and neglect. When we talk about youth violence, that's bullying. It could be initiation into gang violence. It also includes like teen dating violence and even hazing. And then also violence in the workplace. So between an advisor or supervisor or two coworkers. It can also include elder abuse as well. So thinking about our folks who are age 60 plus. So all of those are types of interpersonal violence. And then in terms of the abuse that's experienced within that, we tend to think of it as physical. I would be willing to bet that if you just went and did sort of an informal poll and you ask folks like, what is abuse? A lot of them would lean towards saying physical violence, and that's true. But it can take the form of sexual violence, also emotional and verbal abuse, right? It can also be stalking in person or online. It can also be things like financial manipulation, like not letting somebody have access to their own money or access to resources like a car or getting a driver's license or being able to open a credit card. It could also be like destroying their credit. And then also legal coercion. So thinking a little bit about like if in domestic violence, well, if you leave me, I'm going to make sure you don't see the kids again, right? Or I'm going to divorce you and get custody of them. It can also be manipulation of a legal status. So thinking about immigration, right? Like if you are undocumented, like, I'm going to report you to the authorities if you leave this relationship. So those would all be examples. It's really, really important as we go through this discussion to understand this is always about power and control. An abusive relationship is about one person wanting to deliberately have power and control over another person. and really just isolate them, take full advantage and control of their resources, who they talk to, where they go. And over time, it really can wear somebody down to the point where they don't have anyone to talk to anymore. They don't have anywhere to go. They have no way to get there. All right. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jasmine, to talk a little bit more about that power and control that I just mentioned.
Absolutely. And so, Dr. Kristofi, if you can share your screen one more time for me, so we can have the power and control wheel up. So we know that the power and control wheel was originally created to talk about sexual violence against women, but it's been adapted over the years to focus on our LGBTQ plus community and the disadvantages that they may experience in a relationship. And we know that our LGBTQ plus folks are experiencing interpersonal violence at higher rates sometimes, in comparison to our cisgender folks, sometimes at the same levels. And so it's important that although they are experiencing interpersonal violence at higher rates, that we also talk about what happens when someone is trying to leave the relationship, right? If they're trying to seek services, if they are trying to just even find help from outside entities. So, for example, one of the first things that I want to talk about is outing. A lot of us have heard of outing. We may see it. I remember when Tumblr was a thing. And so a lot of people would post on Tumblr and they would out people by posting their pictures or posting like words, or not words, but like text messages, those types of things. And outing can be a form of abuse in a relationship, right? If this is something that I have not disclosed to my family, my friends, the people at my job, what does that do for me, right? And so thinking of, I'm taking this secret that you aren't ready to share with others, and I'm now sharing it with other people, and I'm using it in a way to hurt you and manipulate you. So this could be a way to get you to stay in the relationship. This can get you to a point where you're trying to come back to the relationship, and so that is one harmful tactic that may be used. Another one is using shaming statements that are based on someone's insecurities. So we know that this can happen in any type of relationship. But when we think about folks in an LGBTQ plus community, thinking about saying to someone, you're not man enough. What does that mean, right? How harmful and hurtful could that be to someone? And so even using those tactics to further hurt them, manipulate them as well. Also, when we think about bullying, right? And so retaliation, harassment. So if I decide to leave this situation, if I decide to seek resources, is something going to be done to me because I have reached out for help? In our current climate right now, on Friday, President Trump reversed the Trans Act that was enacted by President Obama to really support our trans folks as they seek healthcare services, right? And so what does that look like if I have experienced domestic violence, or if I experienced sexual assault and I try to seek resources and I'm trans? Are you going to use that against me to say that they won't listen to me, they won't take me seriously, they're not going to help me anyway? What does that look like? Also, when we think about healthcare professionals using that in a way to have power and control over this vulnerable population as well. And so I think it's very important when we look at this wheel that we think about the different tactics. So thinking about coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, the gaslighting behaviors, and also if there are any children involved. All of these things play a huge role in trying to assert that power and control over someone else. And if you all have questions about this wheel, we can talk about it more once we get to the end. I also have some statistics that aren't as focused on this wheel, but they highlight just some things that our trans community and LGBTQ plus community as a whole are experiencing. So about 44% of lesbian women will experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime, which is really scary, right? And so that's in comparison to 35% of heterosexual women. And so we can clearly see that those rates are higher. Another statistic that we think about is 26% of gay men, and then 37% of bisexual men will experience rape, physical violence, and stalking by an intimate partner in their lifespan. And so just knowing that the LGBTQ plus community are experiencing things at these rates, right? And then another stat that's always fascinating to me is our transgender folks being assaulted in police presence, right? And so we think about the climate right now. And so, okay, I'm not safe to go to healthcare professionals. I'm also not safe if I interact with police, right? How scary could that be for someone? Especially now, not only if they are in the trans community, but what if they're a trans person of color? What does that look like for them? And so knowing that 15% of transgender individuals report being sexually assaulted while in police custody, and we know that doubles when they're African American. We also know right now that we have been seeing an influx of trans death that has been happening. Texas has one of the highest rates of trans death. I think Dallas was ranked pretty high. And so just thinking about, what does that look like for people that need to seek services or need to even, if they are experiencing sexual violence. So Denise, do you want to talk about more specific Texas A&M statistics?
Yeah, of course. So I want to let you all know, some of you may not be familiar with, but there is an Association of American Universities survey that goes out about every 4 years to colleges and universities around the US. And Texas A&M was one of 33 universities that participated in this in 2019. And so the reason that this is really important, I mean, it's always been important, but really right now is because 2019 was the first year that Texas A&M collected data from undergraduate, graduate, and professional students who identify as transgender, genderqueer, or nonconforming. So what we call TGQN is sort of the abbreviation there. So I wanted to share some trends, and these aren't necessarily just trends with Texas A&M, although those are the ones I'm going to share right now. But I just had a conversation a few weeks ago with some faculty members at University of Pittsburgh who are actually doing a pretty large scale survey on these trends that were found nationally. So a couple of things just right off the bat. So if we compare to cisgender students, right? So students who identify as cisgender women and men on our Texas A&M campus, TGQNs reported similar rates of non-consensual sexual contact, sexual harassment, intimate partner violence, and stalking compared to cisgender women on our campus. So similar rates there. However, TGQN students reported highest rates of penetration and sexual touching without active, ongoing, and voluntary consent. So the highest rates on our campus are happening with our TGQN students. Interestingly, in terms of trend, our TGQN students have significantly higher perception that sexual violence is a risk on campus, that they also have greater knowledge of resources and procedures for reporting compared to our students identifying as cisgender men and women, but a significantly lower confidence that a fair investigation would take place if they reported a sexual assault or other misconduct or any type of interpersonal violence. So I think when we talk about power and control being structural, and we talk about some of these issues that are happening when we think about domestic violence in the pandemic, right, and these rising rates of violence that are happening both behind closed doors and in our community, we already were having these issues, obviously, with higher rates of violence happening with our TGQN students and individuals across our country before the pandemic. So that's only making it worse. And I think that these trends really speak to that on our campus and nationally. So with that, I think we are turning it over to the Sexual Assault Resource Center. Yes. Perfect.
Okay, hi. So I do want to give everyone just a brief kind of background of SARC real fast, just that we are a confidential resource. So, and we can get into that more a little bit later, but if anybody needs to talk, we can call our hotline and those kind of things. But I remember I was back at the Rainbow Resource Fair last August, I believe, last August or September. And I probably had some of the best conversations I've had around sexual violence there with the individuals that showed up. Everybody wanted to help. They knew this was an issue in the LGBTQ community. And so because that was kind of one of my first experiences at A&M here. And I started to realize like there is a huge problem in this area, and why isn't this being addressed early on in early childhood? Why isn't it being addressed in high schools, middle schools, when a lot of these are taking place? And so just to give you guys a couple more statistics, Jasmine covered a couple of them, but bisexual women will experience intimate partner violence, so stalking, physical violence, or rape at 61% in their lifetime. So 61% of bisexual women. And that is more than half. So that is such a large number that we are seeing. And so even with also bisexual women as well, they're experiencing it at younger ages too. So from 11 to 17, more than half of bisexual women survivors are experiencing that from those ages. And I think we have to look at how do we talk to our children and kids, and how do we talk to them and show them these statistics, and also give them examples of what interpersonal violence looks like. Like Denise and Jasmine were talking about, kind of the overview on what that looks like. So everybody is growing up with at least some type of example, because I think some of the clients, some people I've talked to, they don't know exactly what it is, and they don't know what it looks like in a non-heterosexual relationship. Because traditionally that's kind of what has been taught growing up, even if people are talking about sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and all of that. It's through a heterosexual lens. So I just think this is really important that we're all talking about this. And when we also go, there was a transgender survey, a US transgender survey in 2015. And in this survey, it showed that 54% of the individuals that responded who were transgender had experienced some type of intimate partner violence. And this number was even higher for undocumented individuals who were transgender, people of color who were transgender, especially people with disabilities too. 61% of transgender individuals with disabilities experience this as well. So these numbers are very large and definitely show us raw data of how big of an issue this is, and how this is more important than ever. It needs to be addressed now, so we can start to see those numbers go down, and we can talk to our kids who are starting to figure out their sexuality and their gender identity, so we can see kind of how this looks in their life, and how they can protect themselves, and how they can be able to come out and talk to people and say, this is what happened to me, and I don't know if I was comfortable with that. And so I just think it's really important that this is a topic that is being talked about. I think it's just amazing, but that's all I have. If anyone else wants to add to that.
So I guess I can kind of take it from there. In case any of my co-panelists had anything to add. Hearing those statistics is really sobering, and I think this highlights why resources and getting information out there is so important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about national, state-specific resources and local resources that individuals can access or utilize, but also allies can access and utilize as well. So even if you yourself aren't in a intimate partner, abusive relationship of any sort, but maybe you think someone that you know might be, or you have concerns about a friend, these are also resources that can be helpful for you as well. So the first one I want to talk about is loveisrespect.org. This is a great resource, not only for just looking at intimate partner violence, but also just any form of abuse in any form of relationships. So that can be friends, families, just whoever those individuals might be. They have a number of worksheets and handouts and resources. One thing I really like is that they have a whole list of kind of warning signs of potentially abusive relationships that can be really helpful, as well as a quiz that you can take to see if maybe you are in a potentially abusive relationship. It also is very gender inclusive, as well as they have many resources for LGBTQ+ individuals as well. And they also have a national hotline that you can use, and I know that link will be provided for you below. In addition, another great resource is the National Domestic Hotline. They also have a 24/7 hotline available that you can use as well. And both of these resources can be really helpful, especially in this time of COVID-19, where maybe an individual is stuck at home or they can't necessarily connect with maybe an outside resource, because in using these resources, each of them on their website have an escape button. And so if you press that button, it will just take you back to like a Google home page or something, so that if you are potentially in the same location as your abuser or whoever your partner is, they will not be able to see that you are on that website. So it can be extremely important during this time. In terms of Texas resource, the Monte Rose Center in Houston is a great resource. They also have a 24-hour hotline. They specifically do crisis prevention, information on depression, suicide, addiction support, as well as domestic violence help, connecting people to shelter, should they need to be connected to resources, sexual assault, HIV, STI, STD testing, I'm sorry about that, and then other helpful information as well. Also, the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault is another great resource. And then in terms of local resources, CAPS is always available. I know Jennifer mentioned Starkbridge is a great resource as well, but CAPS is available. We are seeing students, at this time it is all online, but we are able to offer phone or video sessions. Also did want to mention the CAPS resource, the Let's Talk program that we have in conjunction with the LGBTQ plus Pride Center. You do have to sign up to go to those virtual connections. We do ask that you keep in mind that it's not meant to be a form of counseling, that it's not confidential. So in those spaces, you might not necessarily want to disclose any information that might be personal, but you can go in and say, I think I might be in a potentially abusive relationship, or maybe I know of someone who is, what could I do to maybe go about getting resources or getting help, so that you can still get that information, but do it in a safe and affirming place. In addition to that, Helpline is always available after hours. It's a confidential resource, as well as the Pride Community Center is another great resource that's in the community as well. So I know that was a very brief rundown, and if I stumbled over my words, or if anyone has questions, definitely feel free to ask.
And I wanted to just go ahead, since we were talking about resources, just to do some shameless plugs here. Thanks, Michelle. You gave us quite a bit. I also wanted to just talk about just Green Dot. So Green Dot is our bystander intervention training that we have, which it really teaches our students how to step in if they see a problematic situation. And I think right now in this moment, bystander intervention is very, very, very important. And so taking those transferable skills of, okay, I learned the 3Ds and I learned how to step in, but how can I use this if I see racial injustice? How can I use this if I see a friend is experiencing mental health concerns? How can I support them and get them connected to resources? So all the skills that you learn in Green Dot can be, are applicable to other situations in your life. Also, Denise and I, as an IVP team in health promotion, have really been working on creating intersectional programming. And so I know in the spring and fall of last year, we worked with our international student population to create programming. Me and Frankie actually presented at a conference together talking about, what does programming look like through an intersectional cultural lens, right? And so we are really working to have those resources for our students, because we know that your different identities play a role in how you show up at Texas A&M, but they also play a role in how you navigate life. And so we want to make sure that we have programming to really help and support you in that way. And so in the fall, we'll definitely be having some panels for our LGBTQ plus community, working with the Pride Center, especially when we talk about domestic violence prevention and awareness month that's happening in October. And so just be on the lookout for those things, because we want to have resources for our survivors. Also having a program about domestic violence and COVID, like, what does that look like? Because that's happening right now as well. And so those things are in the works, because we know that it's important to create that type of programming for our students. And me and Denise have been cooking these things up for a while, and it's like, let's hit it while the iron is hot and people are listening and paying attention.
Definitely. And just to add on that, I think that regardless, I know a lot of folks from Texas A&M are watching, so Green Dot's going to be your bystander intervention program. But if you're watching from other areas too, most universities have either Green Dot or a homegrown bystander intervention program. And sometimes they're actually incredibly holistic because they address being a bystander when you see an incivility happening, but that incivility is targeted at a couple of different things, right? With Green Dot, we tend to focus on sexual violence, domestic and dating violence, and stalking. But we build those scenarios to include, well, what if that's happening and it's also somebody who's attacking that person because they are homophobic, right? Or because they're transphobic or biphobic, or because they are racist or xenophobic, right? So multiple incivilities happening at the same time. So as a bystander, how do you kind of start to address those things that are happening together, but also separately for that person, if that makes sense, right? Because in order to address them holistically, you also have to kind of approach them from where did this one thing come from that's leading to this other thing. I think too, for folks at Texas A&M, it's pretty unique. Jasmine mentioned Green Dot. We also have a stand-up program. And I think that that program is incredibly important because what it helps teach is, what if we weren't there? Right? What if we weren't in that crowd or in that bar or at that place in that dorm when this was about to happen to somebody, and it's already happened, and they come to us and they say, hey, friend or roommate, this happened to me and I'm not really sure what to do, right? And so Michelle and Jennifer mentioned all those really wonderful resources statewide and in the community, and even nationally, but also too, what if you're in a situation where you're the ally, right? And you haven't gone through any training, and now you're kind of like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to make this worse. Stand Up teaches you how to say the right thing and not make it worse. So these are free trainings at Texas A&M. Right now we're running 1 hour virtuals on that, but with social distancing, we can do in-person trainings and overviews again in the fall. So things to keep an eye out for if you just also want to learn more on how talk about these things in a little bit more depth too, with folks who work in prevention and intervention all the time. So,
I do want to say, go ahead.
You can go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, I'll go back. I do want to say before we move on to, for those of you that are watching that don't know what SARC is or you've never heard about it, I'm just going to give a brief kind of what we do. All of our services are free and confidential. Like I said earlier, we have a 24-hour hotline. So like Michelle said, in these situations where you might be at home with somebody, you can call. We also have free and confidential counseling, crisis intervention. So we do some other things. I also do education and outreach too. So we are a resource in the community. We're not affiliated with Texas A&M, but we work really closely with all of these amazing people that are on here. So we just really appreciate all of their support, and anyone has any questions, you can visit our website as well, which should be linked as well.
I second that. SARC is an amazing resource. I definitely recommend checking it out. And to add on to what Jasmine and Dr. Kristofi was saying about the bystander intervention, if you can get training on that, or that's available to you, I highly recommend it, because oftentimes individuals who are in an abusive relationship may not realize that it is abusive. And so being able to kind of step in as a bystander and maybe just kind of be aware of what resources are out there and be able to support someone can be really, really helpful in getting them connected to help. So definitely, you know, and also these resources that I mentioned, you don't have to be experiencing any form of interpersonal violence to call. You can just, counselors on there can help you kind of sort through what are some options that you can do as well.
So we have 2 pre-submitted questions that were submitted earlier that we are going to go through now. If you have questions for the panelists, you can again comment that on the Facebook live stream, or you can message the center privately if that's more comfortable. Personal violence during this pandemic, where leaving the house is especially difficult.
I can start on that one. So there are different text lines out there. If somebody wanted to use a text or a chat line, that could help during that as well. And if they are not able to leave the house, they can still use hotlines. I know people have said, I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm going to go to the car really quickly, or find some kind of private space in the house to call these hotlines. And I know depending on where you are and where you live, there are different domestic violence shelters that are still open and still accepting clients. So depending on where you are, try to find one of those. And yeah, like Michelle said earlier too, there is exits, little leave site exit buttons. You can press it quickly gets you out of there. It does not delete your browser history as well on top of that, just if you keep that secrecy on the information you're searching for.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and I mean, definitely during this time, text and the online resources are really, you're kind of able to have a little bit more control over those. So that can be really important, but also, you know, because of everything that's going on with COVID, it doesn't hurt to maybe have a safety plan in mind, which you can definitely do with a counselor through SARC over the phone or any of these resources that I mentioned. But also just thinking of if something were to happen, how do I keep myself safe? Maybe keep important documents that you might need. So especially if an individual is undocumented, you might want to keep any legal papers that are available nearby, your ID, health insurance, those sorts of things, just in case if you do need to leave, you know what, to have a friend pick you up, or you need to go to one of those shelters that maybe is available in your area.
Thank you both. Jennifer sparked for me when talking about text lines. The Trevor Project also has a text line. So if you are experiencing, and we know domestic violence comes in so many different forms. So if you're experiencing that and you can't, text the Trevor Project has specific LGBTQ resources as well. So I know we talked a lot about the control wheel, and so we had maybe you could drill down into it a little bit more. Is what are the differences between interpersonal violence and domestic violence?
I'll jump in. So interpersonal violence is really an umbrella term. So domestic violence is a type of interpersonal violence. So they're not two things that happen separately, but just so that everybody knows what that definition is, because I think that when we say domestic violence, sometimes it's specific type of relationship versus dating violence or even intimate partner violence. So domestic violence by definition is violence that happens between, the basic way I can explain it, two people who are basically tied by law in some way, right? So that could be through marriage, it could be through a child in common, it could be because they're cohabitants and they don't necessarily, like for instance, if they have a child in common, they don't necessarily have to live together, they could live together or apart. In Texas A&M, that includes roommates. So a lot of times Title IX will actually protect because it's a cohabiting situation, even though there may be no romantic relationship between the two people living in there whatsoever. Violence that happens within that domicile or dwelling apartment home does classify as an offense of domestic violence. The difference too with dating violence, so we hear dating violence a lot, right? Is that is a relationship between individuals of a social or romantic nature. So a lot of times that's determined on the length and type and behaviors of the relationship, but there's no tie by marriage. There's no child in common, may or may not live together. Sometimes I know Texas A&M gets a couple of different complaints where it's like they were living together and now they're not anymore, but they're still in a dating relationship and that's what they're calling it. So a lot of times through that sort of investigation, they'll call it what it is. But we're using terms that are used by Title IX. We're using very similar language that you'll see in a lot of state statutes as well. But intimate partner violence in a lot of ways too can include domestic and dating violence, but then it also gets a little more fluid because it can also include, maybe we're not calling it dating and maybe it's not by definition a domestic violence situation. So none of those, I would say, conditions exist, but maybe we're hooking up, right? Or maybe we have a sexual relationship of some kind, but there's also abuse and violence that's happening as a part of that, but we're not really dating. So sometimes we use those, they sound like they're interchangeable and we throw them around as they're interchangeable, but they actually mean the behaviors that are happening within them are very similar, but it's just the nature of the relationship that's different. It doesn't mean that because we're talking about domestic violence right now and a lot of this conversation, it doesn't mean that if you're not in a, by definition, domestic relationship, that it doesn't count if it's happening to you. So if you're dating someone and this is still happening, somebody's hitting you, they're forcing you to engage in sexual behaviors that you don't want to engage in, they're calling you names, insulting you, there's a lot of jealousy, they're following your every move online or in person, then it's still interpersonal violence. If anybody wants to add to that.
So I think it's important with A&M. I love that A&M uses the term interpersonal violence because it covers kind of that gamut of different types of behaviors. But when we think about interpersonal violence, it really happens across the lifespan. So thinking of child abuse, thinking of youth violence, where youth violence can be cyberbullying, bullying, hazing, and then you get to the point of, then it's sexual violence. And then we talked about dating and domestic violence, and then intimate partner violence, and then workplace violence. And so all of these things that can happen on the lifespan is really important why we talk about interpersonal violence in the way that we do, right? And so thinking about what happens when I experience interpersonal violence. We have a web that we created, and you can put interpersonal violence right in the middle, and it talks about, okay, you may experience mental health concerns, or you may experience these conditions. And so it shows just if you experience any form of interpersonal violence, you could still have that same outcome. And I think it's very important for us to talk about that, because a lot of times we just talk about sexual violence and we talk about survivors and, okay, they experience PTSD, they experience depression, anxiety, but what about this person experienced child abuse? What are the things that they're experiencing as an adult, or if they were molested, or if they're experiencing workplace violence? What does that look like? How does that trauma manifest in their life? And I think it's also good to note that children who are around folks that are in a household with domestic violence, little boys are more likely to be abusers, and then little girls are more likely to be abused. Those are the stats that are out there. And so when you think about what are the things that your children may be seeing and the impact that it could have on their lives, there's probably research out there about this as well, but just thinking about the generational trauma of people experiencing interpersonal violence, and so somebody experienced child abuse, and now they are a perpetrator of interpersonal violence, and now somebody else has experienced it. And so just even thinking about how those things are happening as well, and they're not being talked about. So talking about interpersonal violence is really, really important, and it's really a public health issue. And so that's why we talk about it in the way that we do, because it impacts all facets of someone's being.
Yeah, I also want to throw out there, because I think this is really important. When we talk about, I know, for instance, I used to teach and work out at University of Central Florida, and on Friday, we had the 4th anniversary of Pulse that happened, and the university did a really good job of memorializing that, and so did the city. But at the time, I was still there and working at an institution that had 7 students pass away at Pulse. And in the conversations that we had with students, it really, a lot of times it was, I have my community in my city, but I don't have my community at home. So I think it's really important to understand that a lot of times individuals who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community don't have that allyship at home. And when we talk about domestic violence too, we're also talking about parents hitting their kids or isolating their kids, or trying to force them to adopt an identity that they don't want or they don't have, or shaming them, right? So I think that's really important, especially for our college students who might be still living at home or have ties and connections to home and are feeling conflicted because they might be dependent on those resources that their parents have or their guardians, but at the same time, they know that they aren't accepted, right? So just kind of throwing that out there too, that when we talk about domestic violence, sometimes we talk about it from that intimate lens, but it's also my family too that could be causing me the harm. So
I have a follow-up for some of the things that y'all were just saying. Sometimes people in new relationships view jealousy as an indicator that someone really likes them. How do you view jealousy?
So I guess I can kind of take that one. From the counseling standpoint, that is what we would call definitely a red flag. Now, I think it's on a spectrum, right? If it's maybe healthy jealousy, that is a little different. But when it starts becoming about like what Dr. Christofi was saying, this power and control. So, you know, I am jealous and therefore I'm forbidding you from talking to your friends. I'm forbidding you from talking to anyone else or talking to this person that maybe I feel threatened by. That's when it begins to become unhealthy potentially. So some jealousy might be okay in the beginning, but again, it's a spectrum. So if it starts getting more intense and then they start using that jealousy to maybe make demands or even shame, like they may not even make a demand, but like shame the other partner or the other individual in the relationship of maybe kind of being verbally aggressive or abusive, that's when we can see that it's potentially becoming more dangerous. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that when people engage in new relationships and they experience infatuation and you really like someone and that type of thing. But I think it's important for us to unlearn the behaviors that are taught in society of like, and I think that's where people struggle. Like, I got to really show them that I like them. And it's like, wait a minute. Let's set some boundaries here. Let's have some conversations first. And I think when it comes to the jealousy piece, having a conversation of, okay, I feel this way because of this. And even opening that window to have conversations about feelings and seeing where that comes from, right? So maybe I was in a relationship where my partner cheated on me. And so this is why I'm like, and so I'm having this conversation with you because we need to build trust and we need to build this in our relationship, because that's why I'm exhibiting these behaviors. And I think that it's important when you are in new relationships that you have conversations about, okay, boundaries, and this is what I need from you, and this is what I don't need from you, right? Because what if you're on the flip side and you had a jealous partner and now that's a trigger for you? And so now you all aren't communicating or not seeing eye to eye because both of you all are trying to navigate a space that's scary for you. And so I think it's important to have those conversations up front, because the jealousy, insecurity piece can get out of hand very quickly, and turn a relatively healthy relationship into a very unhealthy, borderline abusive relationship. And so having those conversations is important at the beginning. And we talk about boundaries all day long, but it's like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Let's navigate this situation before things get out of hand, to the point where I'm checking your location. I'm texting you 10, 15 times. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that I love the way you put that, Jasmine, because I think it's the feeling itself isn't the problem. Jealousy, you can feel what you feel, right? We're all entitled to feel what we feel. It's how we handle those feelings that could be problematic. I am going to do a shameless plug for CAP's #Relationship Goals webinar series. We do have 2 videos all about boundaries and communication, so check those out on our website as well.
I think it is hard too, because we see so many movies and we see so many TV shows where jealousy is something that like you guys all said, that you want that makes it seem that you really like that person if you're really jealous about what they're doing. And I think it's really confusing for a lot of teens and even young adults when they're seeing this on TV and they're like, wow, that's such an amazing relationship. When then it actually gets put into real life and they're starting to feel uncomfortable and they're confused on why they feel isolated or they feel controlled, because it's not how it was on the Netflix show that you just watched, or think of like Stalking and like all these different shows that are so popular. And so I think that's such an important question to ask, because a lot of people get that confused and they don't really understand the difference between the two and how jealousy is shown in real life too.
Thank you all. So another question, You've alluded to this, but what advice do you give to someone who wants to encourage a friend experiencing interpersonal violence to seek, accept, support? Question mark.
Denise, you want to take this one or you want me to take it?
I think I'll start it off, but I'm sure everyone here definitely has their own perspective to contribute, because we approach this from different angles in the work that we do. So from an educational standpoint, and also, you know, as also a SARC advocate, because Jennifer's like down on my screen, so I'm looking at her, even though she may not know that, kind of like down like the Brady Bunch squares. From an educational and an advocacy standpoint, and somebody who's also been in the situation where I had a friend come to me and say, I'm experiencing dating violence and I don't know what to do. And I was 17 years old and didn't know what to do. Right. And made a lot of mistakes that I wish I could go back and change. I would say the first thing that you want to do is just take a step back and listen to as much as they're willing to give you about what's happening in that situation. One of the bravest things that somebody can do who's experiencing any form of interpersonal violence is approach someone to talk about it, particularly if it's been ongoing for some time and they've just been worn down by this person to the extent that they feel like they're nothing. And they're kind of taking that step to reach out. So that's a very delicate time for them, because your response, no pressure, may completely change it's going to drive a lot of that outcome for them, whether they want to talk to somebody ever again or not, right? Or it takes a long time again. So give them the space to talk about it. We use that sort of line a lot, like, and it's not always going to sound like the way I'm saying it. It's not always like rehearsed from a book, but it could be something like, you know, I had a sense that there was something that was really affecting you negatively. And I'm really glad that you're in a space where you feel comfortable enough talking to me. I'm here to listen. Tell me what you want me to hear, right? Tell me what you want me to know right now. And it may be a lot, and it might be a little bit. And then over time, they tell you some more and they tell you some more. It's going to really just depend on where they are in that moment. And really, I think how exhausted they might be. From there, the best thing that you can do is, if you're going to be kind of an ally for them, you need to set your own boundaries, but you'll do that over time. You don't want to become the person who fixes everything, because you can guide them towards resources, ask open-ended questions. Maybe if they don't want to go out, but they love you to come over and you order a pizza or Thai or whatever it is that they like to eat and you like to eat, you watch some Netflix to decompress, and you say that you're going to be there, just be there for them. But also don't be the person, I've heard students particularly say this, well, I know what that's like and I'm going to fix it for them, or I'm going to put it back the way that it was. You can't do that. And that's not your role. Your role is to be a supporter, not fix the situation. So that's why it's important to know about your resources too, because what you can do then is say, you know, is reaching out something that you want to do? And they might be unsure. You could tell them, you know, I heard about this. Do you want me to get some more information from you? And maybe just reach out and not say anything about the situation, but just get some more about their services and let you know about that. And over time, you start to build that bridge. Now, it can be a little bit frustrating because it's never going to be on your timeline. You may want them to reach out like tomorrow, and it may take them 6 months. It might take them a year. It also might take them tomorrow. It just depends on the situation and how safe they feel. And again, how exhausted they are. But also too, you can't necessarily dictate that they're ever going to tell anybody else. You know, and that can be really frustrating sometimes because it's not what we would want for them as somebody who loves and cares about them. But that might be just where they are right now. We cannot make the decisions, because what happens when we make the decisions for somebody who's had power taken away from them? We take the power away from them, right? And their decisions sometimes are their decisions, whether or not we like them, right? So we can be there for them, not walk away from them, not give them an ultimatum, which I will full up admit I did. When I was 17, and it was probably the worst thing I could have done, because the response to that was, well, he said that you would say that, and he was right. You don't understand our relationship. And she didn't talk to me for 3 years after that, 3 years. And I had to reach back out to see if she was okay. So, and mend that relationship. And I think about all the time that I could have been there helping her had I not done that. So that's just kind of some prelim steps that advice I can give, but I know the others here definitely have some other techniques. So I'm going to pass the baton.
Going off of what Denise said about power and control, that is such a leading theme in interpersonal violence, especially in sexual violence. If anybody comes up to you and tells you that something has happened to them, it is so important to give them control of the conversation. Even just that little tactic of letting them lead the conversation, letting them tell you as much as you want, not asking too many questions about what happened, but just letting them talk about it in a free manner, it really helps, because that power and control was taken away from them in abusive relationships as well. It's such a hard theme for them to understand about having the power and having the control in a situation. So letting them know that you're a resource, that they can talk to you without you leading them or asking questions that may make them feel uncomfortable or make them feel like they don't want to talk about things anymore. It might shut them off to talking to people. So yeah, just being that resource and knowing your community resources, knowing your school resources, to ultimately kind of lead that person there. But yeah, if they don't feel like they're comfortable, healing is such a journey. And we even have clients that were assaulted as children, or they've experienced sexual violence in children, and it takes them 30 to 40 years to come to terms with that. And even though it's so hard from a standby point, you want to help as much as you can. And it's such good intentions. And everybody, when they do that, they have good intentions, but people have their own journeys and they look really different in every case as well.
Yeah, sorry, Jasmine. I would just like to echo what Jennifer and Dr. Christofi said. I think most important is allow that person to regain some of that autonomy, because that's what has been really taken from them. And in addition to that, I do want to stress, like, getting maybe your own counseling can be really helpful as an ally, because you might be really struggling with, I want to help them, but I don't know how to, or I'm really worried about them and that's causing me a lot of anxiety or causing me to feel really anxious. And so know too, it's okay to take care of yourself, do some self-care, get some of your own counseling if you need to, but also know that if at any point in time that individual shows some signs of wanting to get help, that is a good sign. And it is a process, and they may not, they may take that number or that resource and maybe not reach out right away, but just the fact that they're willing to take it is a good sign in and of itself. So I would say allow yourself to celebrate those small victories, and then also take care of yourself, because the most important thing you can do is to be there for them and offer them compassion and non-judgment. And if you aren't taking care of yourself, it's really hard to do that.
All right, since we have 5 minutes left, I wanted to give you all an opportunity just for final thoughts, comments, those sorts of things.
So separating my duties as a Texas A&M employee from as a state employee for not. So here's what I'm going to say. I think that we talk a lot, we kind of framed this with some education and understanding of what the problem is. And this problem has existed since, since time, apparently. But I think we're at a very interesting time in our country right now where there is a chance for allies to use their voice, when a lot of time they seem to be in these small circles, or they happen when there's a massive tragedy, right? And within a week, we're not listening anymore, right? Well, there's just too much going on right now that's all connected for us to ignore some of the intersections of these problems, right? And that is a pandemic and ongoing interpersonal violence issues across the lifespan, and a lot of just hatred and intolerance in our country. and really around the world. So I think right now, one of the most important things that you can do as an ally is try to find a space either on campus. So I'm kind of looking to the Pride Center here, or just maybe in your community, however you define that. Maybe it's campus, maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's Bryan College Station or somewhere else that you call home. And try to figure out how do you take action, right? In a way that's meaningful. What does that look like for you? Does it mean that you become an advocate with a state or national organization, right? Does it mean that you want to get involved in policy change in some way and you find an outlet that does that, right? In terms of getting people out to vote, right? Or getting people on board for a particular social issue and trying to actually initiate that change at a local, state, or national level. Those organizations exist. They're out there. Maybe it's you're a student at Texas A&M or Blinn and you want to become, or you're a community member and you want to become an advocate with the Sexual Assault Resource Center and go through their training. There's a lot that you can do. So you're not just listening to these statistics and you're like, yes, this is a problem. And particularly RTGQN individuals are experiencing the highest rates of all types of interpersonal violence, but what do we do about it? Right, so that's just kind of where I will leave you with it. There's a lot of ways that you can get involved, whether that's information sharing or you want to do something that's a little bit more active than that. There's a lot of ways that you can get connected.
I wanted to ask a quick question just because you sparked it for me, Denise, and we sort of have this platform to do it, so why not? Many of our students are no longer in the Bryan College Station area. How did they find local resources where they are sort of now?
So I might need a little bit of support and help with this. My understanding is that, so you mentioned the Trevor Project before. A lot of times there's an advocacy tab on that website and you can become an advocate with their organization, or I believe they can connect you with local chapters of organizations that are state and local. I know that some work I do with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the same way. They have their national website, but they also have state sort of coalitions that you can sign up for based on your locality. And they do a lot of different types of work statewide, and then that gets funneled to national. So I would look at a couple of the resources that were shared nationally today. And sometimes they list them on the website. It's kind of like you click on the link and then to another link, and then you can just sign up. It's as simple as putting your email in and they start sending you information. Yeah.
Also, the piece I would add to that, I think that is a great start to start with national, but even at the state level. So if you know of a resource maybe in a different city, a lot of different community centers will kind of talk to each other. So even calling them and asking them if they know of anyone who has resources in maybe an area that's closer to you, or if they have a number that they can connect you with, that could be another great option as well.
And Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, they have a part on their page that has all the different rape crisis center in the state of Texas too. So if you're also looking for a resource maybe for yourself in those areas, you can just put in your zip code and it tells you what the nearest family crisis center, rape crisis center, and different things like that. And you just put that in and it usually pops up the closest one to you or what you can utilize.
The director of gender and sexuality, Heather Wheeler at Texas A&M, also wanted me to mention the 211 resource, which is through United Way. And so you can dial that and they will help you find resources in your area. So with that, I just wanted to see if there were any other final thoughts.
With what Denise was saying, if anybody wants to get more involved that is in this area, we do have our advocate training coming up and it is going to be online this time. So normally you have to do it in person and it's 2 weeks long. So we are now doing an online format. And so if you just visit our website, you can sign up for that. It'll be in July. So it's a little bit an easier process because it will be online. So you'll be able to do it from the comfort of your own home, but which Denise can kind of talk about what an advocate is like if Denise, you want to do.
Oh, wow, sure. Jasmine too. Do we have time, Frankie? Okay, good. Okay, I just want to make sure. So one of the first things that I did, I've been at Texas actually 2 years on June 20th, so that's exciting. But one of the first things that I did was go through training with the Sexual Assault Resource Center. So in that role, what I do, there are multiple things that you can do. You can do like the 24/7 hotline. If you want to do that, I know that you can help them table, you can help with education and outreach, but one of the reasons I wanted to do it is because I like to do accompaniment to our local hospital that has sexual assault nurse examiners, and that's Baylor Scott and White. So if you're on call, if you sign up for a volunteer shift and someone comes in who has been sexually assaulted, you are dispatched as the person on call as a volunteer to take really a resource kit and collect some information for SARC from that survivor that then you take back to SARC and they follow up with that individual. My first response out was a minor, but I really was glad that I was there that day.